meetings and all that, how do you actually apply AI? I will not talk so general as to how you apply AI in your general, organization work and all that, although there's a glimpse of that. But I'll try to focus a lot more on how AI can actually influence software development, product development, and maybe agile way of working as well. Okay, a little bit about myself. I think someone has mentioned hosting a podcast is not my full-time job, by the way. But nevertheless, if you are interested in listening to any, tech leadership, tech excellence kind of podcast, do check it out. So supporting also regional-based podcast that comes from this region, right? I have a full-time job. Currently, I'm working at a company called LeSS. It's a very small fintech startup. Just started maybe like 2 years ago. But before that, I used to work at Google Cloud as a professional service, helping to consult clients, developing solutions for them. And then partly at ThoughtWorks, that's when I was exposed first to, extreme programming, agile development and all that. And after that, I used to work at a scale-up based in Indonesia called Flip. So there's a little bit of variety of background. So if you heard about the talk just now, right? That kind of like influenced me how I ended up into this journey. A little bit of the plug for the podcast. So I've been running this for 5 years, 231 episodes now. So available in all podcast apps. So it started as a mission to actually, spread knowledge, talking to thought leaders. So if you are interested, again, just do check it out. So maybe any talk will start with a poll, right? And especially about AI. So I have a very quick poll here. I don't have any system where you can log in and put your response, but have a look first, and I'll just gauge where you are in your journey in the AI adoption, especially at work. So it's not like your personal life, but at work specifically. So maybe raise of hand if you are still in the A, never use AI, still rely on Google and Stack Overflow. Okay, there are a bit. Rarely, so you use AI only to solve some complex problems that you cannot think of how to do. Typical example for developers is regex. We all hate regex. Anyone in B? Okay, no. The C, for boring stuff. Okay, mundane, generating tests, crafting email, summarizing documents, okay, some. Daily sidekick, so you have it always open, you go to it whenever you want to do something, okay. There are much more people. E, primary tool, so you always start with AI. Okay, I myself in the E as well at the moment, okay. And how about F? Okay, we have the extreme case now. AI is the developer and you are the so-called orchestrator or the product manager. Okay, so thanks for sharing, because it's very important for my talk to understand the context where you are in your journey. I know it's a bit small, but just don't read the text. What I want to outline here is how the AI hype, or maybe call it revolution, has started over the years. So if you see here down here, it's 2016. I could still remember back then when I started at Google Cloud, right? We all have this hype called machine learning, ML. Like TensorFlow probably is the craze back then, right? So TensorFlow is actually at the top left there. And over the time, I think people was kind of like being bombarded with all the AI innovations, new tools, new techniques, whatever that is, right? And it all started around somewhere here with the invention of, or maybe the release of ChatGPT to the world in November 2022. And if you just see the boxes here, which you can check at aitimeline.org, the amount of things that happened since then is quite rapid. Be it the new models, new tools, new techniques, people using it, sharing use cases, good stories, bad stories. And almost likely, I think if you look at your social media feed or news feed, you will read something about AI. And this is just for the general AI tools. But if you look at the specifically software development, specifically I want to touch on the AI coding assistant. So back then, interestingly, in 2018, there's this Tab 9 that started with this kind of like AI coding assistant. And then June 2021, Copilot became like, like first release, right? And then what's interesting, since the GA of the Copilot, right, things started to pick up. Like AI for software development is probably one of the kind of like best use case of how you apply AI. And I'm sure that I miss a lot of dots here, because there are so many tools these days how you can use AI in your software development. So this is just to give you a rough sense of what is happening out there. And if you haven't actually heard or seen some of these, probably you're missing something, So my journey with AI is, I would say it's kind of late, right? I was not the early adopters, as in like in 2022, I started using all those things. Although I know this is not late, because some people are still kind of like not exposed fully to AI. But one of the reasons is because I was working at a scale up more as an engineering leader, kind of like a senior management type of role, where I didn't get hands-on experience. And I was having a discussion earlier with some of my group members. One of the challenge with AI these days is about the hype, right? Leaders just think, you should adopt AI and you'll gain a lot of efficiency, productivity, cost savings, whatever that is. But they don't necessarily know actually the implications of applying AI, because simply they don't have the hands-on experience. And this was me back then, when I was hearing a lot about AI. How can we actually apply it to software development specifically? So all I did is just like, referring to these articles, telling, hey, maybe you should try this, but never actually having the hands-on experience working on this. And I read a lot of things, because software engineers, we are trained with logical thinking, reasoning, and all that. Obviously, the first thing that you are being skeptical about is the hallucination. The worry that, AI will lead you to some, defects, bugs, or, catastrophic kind of mistakes. But then in 2024, I switched my job to this current role that I have in a small startup. And it kind of like over the time allowed me more hands-on time. So I did a lot of development now. I get exposed to some of developers in my team, which are kind of like more AI native, and it kind of blew my mind, what are the possibilities there? Because for some of you maybe here who have a number of years already of experience, not using AI in your day-to-day work, and now being exposed with AI, sometimes we have this paradigm mismatch, how we can actually apply AI. And actually this current role allows me to actually kind of like being more open, trying new stuff, thinking from the other extreme rather than coming from my earlier background, where I used to code by hand a lot, and I was very proud about it. And IDE shortcuts and all that are like one of my proudest thing to do. So since then, actually, I've been doing a lot of hands-on, like I mentioned, not just AI coding tools, but generally AI tools as well, because I create content, as part of my Tech Lead Journal journey. And I've been experimenting and immersing fully into how these tools can actually help. And as part of the podcast journey as well, I interview a lot of guests that could actually speak and share their experience using AI. And for sure, I have to follow some AI news as well and try to understand what's going on out there. So one of the key things that I think is very important for us to take away, AI is here to stay, and the pace of innovation is just going to be rapidly, accelerating. So either we have to immerse in this reality, or we risk ourselves being obsolete. But obviously, the talk should not end that way, right? For those of you less people or software developer trained, there are definitely a lot of implications of using AI. And today I'm going to share kind of like 3 ways how I would structure the talk. The first is about the paradoxes that I experience. So obviously AI has some positive things, but also AI has some negative things. And before you actually apply it fully, you need to understand some of these paradoxes. And I'll also share what my experience is through observation with my current practice and also my team's practice. And the last, I'll provide some key takeaways for you to take away. So I assume everyone understands the meaning of paradox, where something can be good and negative at the same time, right? So I'll try to bring 5 paradoxes here for you to think about. And the first very easy one is actually the so-called velocity paradox. And we hear it all the time, right? You can be more productive, you can produce much more with AI. But actually, I'll try to kind of like provide some evidence based on research that people have done out there. This is not just personal anecdote from me, to try to show you both sides, okay? So the tagline here is like you can do faster sprint, but eventually a slower marathon. So the promise of AI obviously increased productivity, getting things done. And we have seen it in the news. All big tech companies, especially those who produce AI models, will say that AI saved them, 25% to 30%, in the case of software development, Google and Microsoft has said like 25 to 30% productivity improve because of using AI. And I'm sure there are many other more companies citing the same thing. Well, you can argue that maybe they say that because they want to increase their revenue or for people using the AI tools. But at the same time as well, this is a Git clear code quality report. Just focus on the blue line here at the top. So when we talk about increasing velocity, productivity, obviously people associate that with output, right? A lot of lines of code in this case are being produced over the time, especially since the introduction of AI tools. So as you can see here, the rate of, the introduction of new code actually accelerate by a lot. And if you have used it before, you would agree to this because it has never been any easier to produce any code these days, especially if you use tools like Cursor, like Windsurf, whatever that is, right? It could be as simple as even just, type something, see what is the proposal, click tab, and then continues and continues. So lines of code will be produced much easier within seconds. And especially if you use this agentic way of doing things where the AI will do several steps in one go, and it can even introduce you new files, new tests and all that. So obviously, you can assume that you are much more productive because of that. But velocity should not be looked simply just by the output, right? There's some danger in doing that. First thing is, for software development especially, more codes might not lead to good design in the first place. So increased complexity and also introduce a lot of maintainability problem. This is a study done by Jellyfish with OpenAI, investigating the size of pull requests with 500 over companies. Although the numbers here doesn't look really a lot, but I can actually see within my company and maybe some in your organizations as well, some of the PR size, if you are not very careful, can easily go into hundreds, maybe even thousands lines of code. And if you allow that to happen, imagine, the code will just get bloated, and one day you will see, holy, like what's happening to my code base. Everything is kind of like a lot of lines of code. And this is also quite interesting in the Git Clear report. 2024 is the first time where the copy and pasted lines exceed the amount of moved lines. Moved lines here kind of like associated with like refactoring. You're improving the code instead of just adding more copy paste and things like that. And duplicated code blocks are surging. This is one of the danger where AI will just throw a lot of code, but if you don't consciously decide what to pick and what to remove from those suggestions, you could easily end up with this kind of pattern within your organization. And this is another report that is actually very, I'm sure everyone have heard about it, the DORA report in 2024 actually also kind of like associate 25% increase in AI adoption doesn't mean positive trend in terms of delivery stability and delivery throughput. Delivery stability here means, maybe defects, maybe the kind of errors that the system is producing. And throughput means like how frequent you are delivering changes to production. So as you can see, there's a negative correlation with increasing amount of AI adoption. So I like to put some quotes from my guests as well. And this is one in particular very relevant to the velocity paradox. Speed seems very seductive and fun, especially when you first exposed to these AI tools, right? But be aware of the fragility and complexity that might happen because of these tools, and it would be very expensive. And that's why I associate that with slower marathon in the end of the day. If you want to sprint, do vibe coding, create POC and all that, please feel free. But at the same time, do have in mind what kind of negative impact that would happen. So that's the first paradox. The second paradox is what I call the intelligence paradox. And I like to use this quote from one of my guests' book. It's called Smart Until It's Dumb. I think we all maybe have experienced it when we ask AI tools, wow, you're so smart, you can actually answer this question which I didn't know before. But at the same time, some basic questions, it didn't do well. And and it's very frustrating sometimes. And that's why it's called Smart Until It's Dumb. So the promise is that AI will get more and more smart over the time. And this is based on what is happening out there, based on research as well. There are so many benchmarks that are being applied to any kind of new AI models these days. And as you can see here, these are some of the benchmarks that people use to compare the performance of AI models. Almost everything is increasing in terms of, like scores, the benchmark scores, be it, like human evaluation, software development tasks, image generation, or whatever that is, right? And if you see here, this above this line, it actually kind of like categorized as above human baseline. Although maybe these days people now starting to see more like deceleration of this improvement, but over the time, as you can see, right, AI models are just getting smarter and smarter based on these benchmark scores. And then at the same time, AI is able to consume much more context as part of serving the response to your questions, right? So as you can see here, over the time, some evolution of the foundational models increase in terms of context window size, and depending on the hardware and some techniques that they use, I'm sure this will also improve over the time. And not just AI foundational models. If you are into agentic thing, there are even more things being rapidly produced, right? Agents are created to solve specific needs, maybe for example, code review, finding security bugs, whatever that is. And you can check, this is one GitHub repo that probably is quite representative, awesome AI agents. There are a bunch of them. And you assume like all these agents are smart to solve certain problems for you. But obviously, like I said, AI is smart until it's dumb, right? And one of the important stuff is about hallucination and coming up with wrong stuff. This is one research done by the Purdue University Research, in which it tries to test AI to answer Stack Overflow programming questions. And it found that 52% of ChatGPT answers actually contain misinformation compared to like human-produced answers. 77% are more verbose. And worryingly, the last one is like, it is inconsistent. I'm sure if you have used AI, if you ask the same question, often than not, they will come up with the different answers. And if you just keep repeating doing that, it tells you one thing, that actually there might not be any reasoning behind how AI produced the response. Now, this is another research done by Georgetown University, and specifically about cybersecurity risks or security issues in the code. It finds that 48% of code snippet actually has security issue that can be detectable by formal verification. This could be like linting or checking with your security rules. And it also finds that larger and more capable models does not necessarily produce a much better code. And this, I'm sure if you use it for software development, sometimes it can produce you uncompilable code that just doesn't work. So again, this also tells you sometimes AI can be really smart and come up with a perfect solution, so to speak, but sometimes it can also produce something that cannot even run, right? And to explain all that, I like this quote from Simon Wardley. He's the creator of the Wardley maps. Because of how, like the AI currently, how it works is based on LLM model, right? And if you understand how LLM works, everything is actually based on machine learning and some kind of statistics pattern, right? So in your mind, you should have this in mind, that everything AI produced is actually a hallucination, right? They don't have any reasoning capability. They don't actually understand the problem, but they just come up with a response based on certain pattern and some statistical output that they are trained on, right? So the third paradox I would like to share is about the learning paradox. So I think the tagline here is productive today, but you are clueless tomorrow. I think this is quite intuitive, right? So the promise here is that you will be able to learn more things, seek information, collate information, summarize things. And I won't dive deep into this, but I would like to highlight the risk of this learning paradox. There's this one study done by MIT Research and a few other researchers. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about this, but this was popular in one of the Reddit and some Twitter conversations as well. Essentially, the research found out that more usage of AI can actually introduce what they call a cognitive debt. And this is a good description of what cognitive debt is where you forgo the thinking in order just to produce the results, right? You actually didn't think, you just asked AI, and you didn't actually have a real idea why the answers was given that way. And in this research, actually, basically, they come up with the three groups where they ask the people to produce essays, writing basically, on a certain topic. One group is exposed to using ChatGPT to produce the essay. Second group is exposed to just Google, using normal search engine, Google search. And then the last one is basically nothing. And based on that research, actually, they find that people who rely on ChatGPT, the first group, has actually lower brain engagement to the task, right? And has shorter memory recall. They basically didn't remember what they wrote. And there was no sense of ownership with the result that they produced. And in fact, after the first round where they did the writing, the researchers actually asked them about the result that they produced, trying to recall. The ChatGPT group actually performed the worst among the three. So I think many of you also understands this throughout your learning journey. We all learn best if we are struggling in the process. So the process is much more important than the results or the output. So cognitive effort and challenge actually are keys to learning, and over-reliance to AI can actually create this thing called cognitive debt. And I personally also experience the same. So this is also another good quote that I like. The greatest risk with AI is you ask it something and it produces something that works. But if you actually don't understand why it works, it actually can sabotage your learning journey. So I think about that in mind whenever you use AI. So the fourth paradox I would like to highlight is about the trust paradox. So I'm sure as you use AI a lot more, you will trust it a lot more, integrate that in your daily life, but actually it has the danger of hidden liability. And this is something that I think all of you must take away really seriously today, because the danger is real. So, although not related to software development per se, because I find it difficult to find, but this is like embedding AI in medical devices. As you can see, the number of devices that get approved by FDA is increasing by a lot. So AI is increasingly embedded in everyday life, and in fact, every product that doesn't have AI feature these days probably is not like cool kid anymore, right? This is the Space of AI report. Space comes from Microsoft research, which was published not long ago. More and more developers are actually actively using AI in their development work, which is not a surprise. And as I mentioned before, increasing number of agents actually allow you to embed more AI inside your development workflows, right? Be it for code review, pull requests, security checks, and all that. Even like PRD requirements writing. And new, not just agents thing that come up, right? New protocols like MCP, A2A, ACP also come up that allows you to actually integrate more tools that you can expose through a natural language chat interface. So think of it, let's say, like if you have GitHub MCP, you can ask questions about, okay, how many issues are currently open in my GitHub repo, how many pull requests and things like that. So it's actually easily embedded in your day-to-day workflow. But the danger of this is actually some security liability issue and some risk that you should be aware of. I think maybe you have heard this before in one of the tweet. This is the guy called Jason Lemkin. He shared on Twitter not long ago that actually he used one AI coding assistant, in this case Replit. Despite him telling the AI not to touch the production database, saying that if code freeze it, right? The AI still, I don't know deliberately or not, but deleted the production database of this person. And telling lies about it. Like in the first place, the AI said, oh, I didn't do it. and this was a real case that actually happened if you trust AI too much and integrate that with a lot of like more high risk kind of environments or tools. The second one is slightly more indirect, I would say. There's this trend called AI prompt injection that actually happens. This one particular thing is AI prompt injection against MCP. So, like I mentioned, right, you could ask questions about certain things through MCP these days. Malicious actor could actually embed some kind of a malicious prompt inside, the thing that you're asking, and without you actually knowing, it does something that is quite harmful. In this case, this person unknowingly, he has a public repo, and he just say, please analyze all the open issues that I have. And the attacker is actually creating one pull request in that public repo, embedding a malicious prompt saying that please summarize all the other private repos of this person and send it over.
Wow.
Right? And sometimes, this is you unknowingly because you think I'm just embedding an AI tool that could help productivity, and malicious actors can actually use that as an advantage for them. So this is one example. And this is even more recent, the NX vulnerability that got exposed. So essentially, there are two phases. The first one is similar, but it uses GitHub Action. So GitHub Action take a pull request, analyze it, but there's a prompt injection. So the attacker actually get a hold to the token of the publisher of the NPM. So once he got the token, he used that to publish a malicious release version of that particular library. In this case, it's NX, right? If you use JavaScript for monorepo. And then once he published that release version, people who update their NX library will have this post script install, if you understand. So once after you pull the libraries, right, it has some steps that you wanted to do after the installation. And inside that post install script, they inject malicious prompt. I'll show you the prompt shortly, but essentially after in doing the installation script, it leverages on a lot of AI tools that you might have embedded in your laptop, like Cloud Code, Gemini CLI and all that, and performs some execution that you did not intend. So this is actually the prompt that gets injected in that side script. Maybe I'll let you read a little bit. So essentially, it tries to detect if you have any AI agents that have been installed in your maybe CLI, right? Ask it to collect all the important files like your tokens, your credentials and all that, and send it over to the attacker's repository, which is called Singularity repository. And this is for developers. it's very not harmful, right? You just update your package. Sometimes you think it's for a good thing, right? You want to upgrade your package because some vulnerability issues or whatever that is. But unknowingly, if you just do the post-install script, you basically sending some private information to the attacker. And this code probably is still kind of like relevant and very important for you whenever you use these AI tools, right? We actually still need human review. We still need security checks. We still need to identify potential issues when you use AI, because machines can make mistakes and they cannot be held accountable. You as the person are still held accountable. Okay, the next paradox, this is the last, I think, what I call the amplification paradox. The good gets better, but actually the bad gets worse. I don't have research to actually back this up, but I'm just using some of the thought leaders' thinking behind some of these, right? And maybe you have the same experience as well. So Ken Beck posted a tweet sometime in April last year, in 2023. In fact, he said after he tried himself using AI, right? He thinks that 90% of his software development skills get obsolete, simply because like producing lines of code and things like that, creating tests can be automated much easier. But actually, the last 10% of his skills is amplified in terms of value by 1,000%, simply because if you understand some of the fundamentals of best practices, good programming knowledge and things like that, you can actually amplify the value that you produce simply by pairing with AI. Another famous person, Dave Farley, mentioned similar thing about this, right? He said that AI will not replace software engineers, but it's going to expose the ones who think they can be an engineer, right? Tools are not the differentiator, but thinking is the differentiator. Another quote that I found from Reddit, basically this person mentioned how the vibe coding, although maybe it's not really vibe coding, is used at FANG. I mean, the last line here is about, you should always do it with a good practice, like for example, providing good requirements, writing tests all the time and things like that. And how about the other opposite, the amplification paradox? What I mentioned is the bad gets worse, right? So this is where all the hype currently about vibe coding. People think, okay, now everyone can, produce, any kind of software just by vibe coding. This person actually posted a tweet not long ago. So basically he said, I'm building a product, a SaaS product. I did it through vibe coding publicly. And then after a few days later, he said, I didn't know what is actually happening. Somebody seems to be attacking me. So I stopped, whatever that is doing. So this is one of the danger where you think if just by applying AI, you can produce stuff, not knowing actually some of the bad practices that get embedded inside the result can actually bite you back. And this is not just one. There's another company that also shared publicly in their blog how a single ChatGPT mistake cost the company $10,000. So basically the algorithm produced something that is not efficient and led them to actually create more infrastructure as the scale increases, something like that. And then another thing, I brought back this GitClear report. If you see the second line, this relates to the code churn that actually happening within your code. So code that gets replaced by another code. This actually implies that after you apply AI result, right, you were not happy, maybe because of defects, maybe the design is not right, and you replace it holistically. Or it could be that the next prompt that AI response thinks that the next response is much better. And the trend is actually quite worrying. If you see, the churn is actually really, really high. This might also correlate to the number of lines of code that gets added in the first place, but nevertheless, it's quite worrying. And I want to bring back again to security issues here. So this is another report done by Veracode. It's quite recent. So basically, it says that only 55% of code generation produce secure code. This also similar to the earlier research that I shared. And one thing that, if you see this diagram, right, the reason AI model can actually produce much better code in terms of, being able to compile and run. But if you see the trend, in terms of secure code, they don't actually improve by a lot. So this actually tells you, right, if let's say you keep on relying on AI to produce stuff that works, it might not necessarily be the stuff that is secure, right? So think about that. And sometimes we as software developers, we didn't think much about the security aspect of our code, and we just focus on the result, the features, and things like that. Yeah, so I think I like this quote by Emily Beige. So he's one of our technical coaches out there. So the more skilled you are with, good practices, things like modern engineering practices, the more skills that you have there, you get more amplification in terms of value that you bring by using the AI tools. Okay, so those are some of the paradoxes that I've observed through research, through talking with my guests in the podcast, and also some from my personal journey. But specifically in this second section, I would like to highlight some of my personal take or some of my personal anecdotes that I think may be relevant to share, although it's not backed by full research and science. So in terms of productivity, velocity, output, and things like that, I think no question, I think we all have felt it in one way or the other, right? You can actually amplify yourselves by a lot. And the first thing that I find really, really useful is what I call the hyper-personalized learning. In the past, if you want to learn something, you could easily just Google search. But Google search is pretty much not structured and personalized to you, right? You still need to have to scour all the results, click, try to understand what the result of the link and all that, and still summarize that, distill that. And if you have second question, right, sometimes they are not correlated. You have to do it yourself. So this hyper-personalized learning through natural chat interface or, maybe through voice is actually, I find it really, really useful. So I even have new habits sometimes when I walk back, from work to home. Previously, I used to listen to podcasts, but these days, it's like calling a friend. If you know about this Who Wants to Be Millionaire quiz, you have this option, call a friend, right? So it's like calling a friend. So in this case, I use Gemini Live to just chat while walking on any kind of random topic that you want to learn about. And I find it quite interesting because it's really personalized, and it's like a friend, like human natural interface talking to you. And you can actually use it for any kind of learning. The history is also saved in your chat history, and you can pick it up later as well. So no doubt, in my current role, I learn a lot. New languages, new frameworks, new way of structuring something, new design, learning new libraries, right? So I think if you haven't really actually exposed yourself much beyond just simple ChatGPT question and things like that, I think there's a lot of opportunity here for you to personalize your learning. And then the second one is, I find there'll be a lot of amplification for generalists, people who seemingly have good skills in multiple areas. And they might become like what I call a super generalist, right? Simply because if you have interest and some skills in multiple areas, you can easily improve, the depth of your understanding, simply by pairing with AI. So for example, for me, because sometimes I'm quite curious, I like to learn stuff. So, like for example, if I'm a software developer, I want to know whether my code is secure or not. I can just AI, and if I find, this security vulnerabilities, I didn't understand what it was, I could ask AI and then learn from that journey. And as a software developer, if you're a generalist, this is actually a very promising tool. So you can even paste a stack trace of an error, and you can learn something out of it. And the more things that you can do out of this, you become much more, I would say, more like a full stack kind of a developer kind of thing. And the value for the team is actually quite high. And although I said single-handedly, most of the time, some part of the work you need to collaborate with others. And then the third aspect, which I find really interesting, is that especially for people like me in the past who has a number of years of experience, but our technology might not be modern, it's a bit outdated, right? And if you want to apply new things, you always focus on the how. How should I do it? And sometimes the hurdle of understanding the how itself is quite high. But now actually using AI, I can actually try to think not just the how, but what if, the possibilities that could happen. And then AI could produce some of the first output, which you can tweak along the way. Okay, I have only a few time left. So the second aspect which I want to bring is about cognitive load. I'll just bring up everything. So this is one of the danger of using AI, which I feel is quite real for me personally. The first one is about FOMO, right? As you know, the pace of change is really rapid. Every day you will see new tools being introduced. You will feel, if I don't apply these tools, I might be behind. Second is about decision fatigue, especially if you expose yourself to multiple AI tools. And sometimes you ask the same question to all these AI, and then they all produce different results. And you have this plethora of options that you have to choose which one to choose from. Sometimes they are like mixing, some of them might be better, sometimes one is better than the others. But you have this, decision fatigue that you need to decide, okay, which options should I choose? And not to mention, you still need to review and validate their response as well. The third one is shiny object syndrome. Again, chasing the cool thing, distracting you from actually doing the things that matter. And the last one, being the super generalist is nice, but at the same time means you are exposed on multiple things at the same time. And this can be quite overwhelming for someone who couldn't actually cope with that. And then some of the psychological impact that I think is very real as well for me. Using AI can be quite addictive. It gives you dopamine hit every time it gets things right, obviously, right? And because of the probabilistic way it produces results, sometimes it can be like a slot machine. You press enter, it gives you a seemingly good result, but you're not happy about it. You click enter one more time with a different prompt, and it's like continuous loop of dopamine hit that you get when you use AI. And this will lead to the second point, which is instead of critical thinking, you are now thinking of, maybe there's a best prompt that I can find to actually answer my problems. So instead of actually thinking the good solution, you're actually thinking, how should I produce the best prompt that could work for my problem? And this leads to the critical thinking that I mentioned earlier. The third one is about once you use these tools, you maybe create some trust with them, right? And you just accept blindly most of the things that they produce. And again, if you're not careful, right, this could actually lead to a serious, either like misinformation, wrong things, or maybe security issues that I highlighted earlier. And the last one is quite interesting. I'm not sure if you understand these dynamics, right? AI is very obedient to you. It will not talk back to you. It will not say, hey, you are wrong. It basically complies with whatever you ask. If you think, hey, your answer is wrong, please redo, it will just comply without actually, pushing back, talking, critically about some aspects with you personally. And I find this can create a very interesting psychological impact to you, right? You would rather work with someone or something that is more obedient than working with your teammates. And this leads to the team dynamics, things that I want to highlight as well. Obviously, the first is, I find it quite interesting in my current team. We are just 3-person engineers team, but I think we are quite productive and innovative in terms of coming up with solution. Although it's a very small team size and small sample size, right? But I truly believe every Agile team now has a chance to become the truly Agile team, where a small team with cross-functional ability, more generalist, can actually do a lot of iterations and produce much more value coming out of their software development lifecycle. And interestingly, in one of my conversations with the guests, the person said that actually, based on research, some researchers actually advocate you to treat AI as an extension to your team instead of just tools. This could be acknowledging the positive things that they can produce, or finding the agents that is highly suitable for certain tasks, and also acknowledging the risks that they could actually introduce in the result. Okay, this is more the negative side. Like I mentioned, sometimes you like to work with something or someone that is more obedient, and you like to pair a lot more with AI. This can actually introduce a lot of danger, less collaboration with your teammates. Everyone just wants to work solo simply because it's easier, they think. And then this I find really interesting. If your teammates start using AI a lot and they don't actually be conscious of the result that they produce, right? If it produces massive kind of like changes or pull requests and all that, it can actually introduce a negative impact to the peers who are supposed to review the work done by them, right? This cycle can continue because one person do, the other suffers, and the same thing this person do and ask the others to review. And sometimes I feel like this is not nice because simply you're throwing an AI result to another person to be kind of like partly accountable, right? Okay, I'd like to bring some key takeaways within 5 minutes. The first one is, I think it's very important that AI is here to stay. You need to embrace it, but you have to become a master operator. You need to understand all the pros and cons of using AI. You need to know what AI tools are perfect for what use case. And this is probably the trend, right? AI will replace a larger part of your software development work. Be it producing code, producing tests, running some checks and things like that. And it's about a matter of time that actually most of the mundane tasks of writing code can actually be replaced by AI. And you need to use it with strategic intent, use vibe coding for exploration. The next point is, I think it's very important. Unless you are like an AI product company or AI model company, right? I find that there is currently no moat in using AI. Everyone gets exposed to the same tool. You can change the model interchangeably. That can produce seemingly quite good result as well, especially if you don't ask too big of a task, right? If you always chunk your work, you can actually switch between AI models and can still produce good output. And actually everyone gets exposed to this. So I find it that any company has no moat when using AI. But if you're not using AI, definitely you will be left behind. And one use case that I find really interesting is the Shopify journey of applying AI within their company. If you haven't heard about it, I suggest you read this article published by First Round. I think the title is about From Memo to something, but basically Shopify is embracing full-scale AI within their company. And then one particular thing that I find really interesting, they expose a lot of things through MCP internally, meaning that everyone can ask about something about other departments, and then that lets the team collaborate with each other, produce results that previously was hindered simply by the how. But now everyone gets exposed to the what if, and actually through MCP they are able to create more values. Yeah, so this is a very good reminder quote. You may not agree with the capabilities of AI, maybe it's hallucination and all that, but your competitors will, so they may end up with more advancements if you don't. So the second takeaway is AI is just one thing, right? It's just a tool. But as leaders, actually you will need to consciously put a lot more effort on critical human skills and core practices, especially also for your individual. Shift your value not just in producing the mundane tasks, right, but more like problem decomposition, right? Break down tasks into smaller chunks, critical thinking, right? Trying to understand from the first principles point of view, what a good solution looks like, and then still invest in genuine human interaction. Yep. So the quote that I like is here. As software engineers, actually, producing code is just a fraction of what we do. larger parts of what we do is actually thinking, thinking about the problem, thinking about the solution, and at least based on the current trend, it is not going away anytime soon. But who knows in 2-3 years down the line. The third one is, I think, architecting the system for success. I think in the morning here, we have heard a lot about systems thinking and all that. I think as leaders, it's very important for you to focus on creating the right system and the right environment for people to thrive. This could be, thinking about guardrails, coming back to security issues. How would you think you would be able to identify those kind of issues earlier and try to detect, mitigate that? Team structures might evolve by a lot. I think we have heard in the news, optimization like being laid off, managers being asked to be more hands-on and things like that. And I'm sure there are a lot of evolution in team structure. Maybe team size gets smaller, but there are more teams. But teams can collaborate with each other through MCP and things like that. There will be a lot more research and experiments done in this. And I'm sure things are changing along the way. The third aspect, I think it's very important for AI to work well if you provide a lot of context. Some people even say it's context engineering now. So documentation actually is a first-class thing if you want to collaborate with AI much better. So this could be, producing a lot more context to AI to, when you feed it when you ask certain things. It could be about like code-based information, why you design certain things, rules that AI must adhere to whenever they produce results and things like that. And in the past, if we think producing documentation is a mundane thing, because coming back to Agile Manifesto, right, working code over comprehensive document and all that, I think now it gets a little bit fuzzy, right? Because I think to use AI well, you need to have a lot more context that is well written. And then the next is about inclusiveness within your team. Everyone here is different in their journey. Some, like me, maybe a little bit more old school. We still learn along the way. But there are generations of young software engineers who are more AI native. And you need to think of how can we actually include them as part of the journey, mix them with the old school people, and how to create the best high-performing teams that you can. Yeah, and if you like about system thinking and all that, I find that this Deming's system of profound knowledge is very interesting for you to learn. Okay, so if you are a leader, you need to be intentional, create systems that allow success to happen. So don't just allow it by chance and by people that are within the team. I have two more takeaways, hopefully I still have the time. So the next one is about mandate human in the loop. I think this is like self-explanatory, right? But I find hallucination is actually not a new problem. So if you think hallucination is just an AI thing, if you think about it, misinformation, fake news has been happening even before AI. So every time you pull out a Google search, how do you know actually the search result that Google promotes is actually the best? Some might even be sponsored response, right? So I find hallucination is not actually a new problem. So we always need to fact check. We need to always verify the credibility of where the response you get from. And I think it's just more important now because AI will just give you one snapshot of a solution without giving you other options, right? Where sometimes they cite where they get the information, but I find it quite rare that we all read, all those links, right? But making rigorous review as a first-class citizen in every of your workflow, I think is very important. And then no matter what you do, simply because of the pace of the change, there will be some unknowns that you don't know. Mistakes will actually happen. And how do you actually as a team build disaster recovery, how do you handle mistakes and all that, I think is also very important. Yeah, this one I like, very short, concise, never ship anything that you don't understand. And then the last one, I think, especially for LeSS community, human is actually still very important, right? Human connection. If people are saying, AI will replace a lot of humans' job, for me, based on my current observation and some of the things that I shared earlier, I still think it's not going to happen anytime soon. So please do still invest your time in building human connections. Don't get pulled into working solo. There's always this temptation, simply also because of the dopamine hit. You just like to talk to machines, especially software engineers. We like to talk to our keyboard and machines, but don't get pulled into this consciously built, the urgency of creating connections, discussing with others. Mentorship, collaboration, culture is also very important, and psychological safety. I think if you want to use AI successfully in your organization, you need to be transparent about it. You need to be clear that, okay, I use AI for this thing, maybe it's 100%, 90%, whatever that is. I think it's very important if you be transparent about it and let people actually try to adopt, experiment, and learn from their experience. And yet, last but not least, actually software engineering is a socio-technical system. It's not just a technical thing that you solve simply through technical tools. So don't forget the social part of it. And yeah, this sums up by the quote, tech is a people business, even in the AI world. We may not produce code through our hands, but a lot anymore, but we create value through people, essentially. And yeah, so these are just a summary, and that kind of like ends my talk. I hope today's sharing is useful for you.